Joining us now, Tony Perkins. We're going to ask him about all this and much, much more. Tony Perkins is from the Family Research Council. You've probably seen him on TV talking about this. He's been a very busy guy. You can follow him on Twitter at @TPerkins. Tony Perkins, welcome to the show.
Andrew, good to be with you.
All right, so there's a lot of possible outcomes to the Proposition 8 and DOMA cases. I mean, they could call marriage a fundamental right. They could, in effect, limit gay marriage just to California only, which I think some of the justices and most of the justices agreed that making gay marriage legal in all 50 states was not somewhere that they were willing to go in the court. I mean, they could uphold Proposition 8. They might uphold or strike down the relevant positions of DOMA. I mean, there's so many different outcomes. So I want to ask you, though, what will religious voters do if the court declares that gay marriage is a fundamental right under the U.S. Constitution?
Well, it's a good question because when it's been put in this context of rights, that there is this human right to marry the person you love. Well, that opens up a whole new realm of issues. But let's just focus on the rights for a minute because we can, if we want to talk about rights, we can talk about the rights that have been lost in those places where same-sex marriage has already been created. We've got 9 states, either by court action, legislative action, or in 3 places where places where people have actually voted on it and enacted it. You've got the loss of religious freedom. Charities in Massachusetts that are no longer able to do the adoptions because of this. Here in D.C., desperately needed social services no longer provided because of this issue. Churches have been sued. Parents have lost the right to determine whose values their children will be taught in school curriculum. Small business owners have been sued, in some cases fined for not participating in same-sex marriage ceremonies because they were bakers or photographers. So if you want to talk about rights, there's rights on both sides of this. Mm-hmm. This is ultimately not about the marriage altar. It's about fundamentally altering America, and that's why many people remain concerned about taking such a drastic public policy change when this debate is so young in the context of how we change policy in this country.
So it sounds like you're worried that any decision by the Supreme Court could interfere severely with religious liberty, and in fact it already has.
Oh, no question. Kai Feldblum, who was nominated by the president to serve on the EEOC, she's open lesbian. She wrote the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which has been debated in Congress, yet to pass, but been debated many times. And she said that she doesn't find a case in which religious liberty would prevail over sexual rights. And so, yes, there is great concern that there is this head-on collision coming between religious freedom in America mm-hmm. and this issue of same-sex marriage.
It's a great question, Tony Perkins. I mean, really, the First Amendment versus the 14th Amendment, who wins? I mean, this is a huge and arguably, I'm not sure if the court has ever looked at a case where you're really, I mean, in this way so quickly, as you pointed out. I mean, gay marriage is a fairly new thing that people are talking about and advocating for. And it sounded like, and we played Justice Scalia challenging Ted Olson yesterday, it sounds like he's saying, look, when the founders put the Constitution together, they weren't thinking about giving rights to gay couples to marry, nor were they thinking about excluding these couples. And so basically, look, this doesn't apply to the Constitution. It's a states' rights issue. Kick it to the states and leave me alone. What would happen, Tony Perkins, and how would you feel if the court did leave the issue up to the states and uphold a DOMA and struck down Prop 8?
Well, Andrea, to your point about the newness of this, I mean, Justice Alito even brought this up yesterday in the hearing where he said, this is newer than the Internet and cell phones. I mean, this is new. And part of the reason for our federalist system is that by what you said, leaving it to the states, the state is a smaller laboratory in which these things that we do are experimented with and we look at the ramifications of them. But a one-size-fits-all, a 50-state solution to this, I mean, once you go down this path, turning back around is going to be extremely difficult. And, we're talking about tinkering with, 5,000 years of human history, certainly 230 years of history or more in this country when it comes to marriage law in all of the ramifications. I spent a decade in office, and I can tell you legislators move too quickly, judges move even quicker when it comes to changing policy like this without thinking about the unintended consequences. And there would be a number of unintended consequences that would come from imposing a 50-state solution or even striking down California's law, because that would set up a domino challenge, I believe, to the other 29 states that have placed into their constitutions these protections of natural marriage.
Speaking with Tony Perkins, president of the Family Research Council. So, Tony, will you and your organization and religious voters, would you then accept a 10th Amendment outcome?
Well, I mean, I think that's where we are. I mean, there was efforts, back in 2004, 2005 for a constitutional amendment defining marriage. I think that train has left the station. That's not going to happen. I do think remains the possibility of a constitutionalized DOMA for the purposes of the states. I think there's a very strong argument made that the states need to continue to have the right to determine this. Even the proponents of same-sex marriage argued this not more than 5 years ago or less, that this is a states' rights issue. So I think that's where we're at, and I think that's where we are comfortable continuing to be. You've had 30 states that have placed the definition of marriage into their constitutions, only 3 states voting contrary. So, when you look at the polls, the polls that really count are when people go into the voting booth and vote, and 30 to 3 is a pretty wide margin of support for natural marriage.
Other than upholding DOMA and Prop 8, you mentioned the states' rights. Is there any other outcome that would be acceptable to you and to religious voters? Because, I think that this is going to be front and center in the 2014 election, no matter how the court rules. And a lot of people are wondering and worrying that this could put a fault line smack dab in the middle of the Republican Party. What are your thoughts on that?
Andrea, I think it goes beyond just the Republican Party. I certainly think that does create, we've even seen that with Chairman Priebus's comments last week, that the party needs to be more inclusive, suggesting it needs to move away from a strong stand on natural marriage. It's creating ripples within the party already. But I think broader than that, I think this could be a fault line within the country if the court goes too far. I mean, we saw this 40 years ago with Roe v. Wade in 1973. The court overreached, interjected itself into something that only at that time about 3 states had actually voted on in terms of the people. And 40 years later, that issue hasn't been resolved. In fact, what you did is you energized a generation of cultural activity surrounding that issue on both sides that, again, is far from being resolved. So I think the court has that as a backdrop to this decision that they're going to be making. Well,
and even Ruth Bader Ginsburg had said, even though she agrees with Roe, it might not have been the best way to come to that decision. And there's a number of people, Alan Dershowitz and others who have said the exact same thing. They've echoed those sentiments. To your point about racing and rushing to do things, I do think that they're racing a little too quickly on this. I'm skeptical that the high court should even be looking at these cases. 9 justices on the issue of marriage, to me, I'm not even sure, and I would support Scalia's sentiments on that one. I'm not even sure that this is within the bounds of the U.S. Constitution. And look, I don't have to tell you. We see it happening with gun control legislation. Andrew Cuomo, for example, he raced to do something about gun control quick on Sandy. Now he's actually trying to repeal certain provisions of his own law. And so I would hate to see this happen with the highest court. I would hate to see them overreach on this issue. It sounds to me, Tony Perkins, like they're a bit apprehensive to make a big, bold ruling on gay marriage that even, again, Bader Ginsburg said, look, there was a lot more precedent that we saw with other cases. This is just so new. So I think the justices are moving cautiously. I hope that they do. But that does not mean that we should exclude gays, at least from the Republican Party. Those are my thoughts. I had some harsh words for CPAC on that one. Tony Perkins, thank you so much for joining us. This is going to be a big issue, and I hope you'll come back and join us when the ruling comes down. We would love to have you.
All right, Andrea, good to be with you. All right, Andrea, good.